Alright y'all, today is Monday, it's full of spoilers. Today's couple is Rick O'Connell and Evelyn Carnahan. Okay, so we're gonna go off based on where I left off. That night, O'Connell, Evelyn, Jonathan, and Daniels headed to the Cairo Museum to once again seek Dr. B's help. Evelyn believed that if the Black Book of the Dead could bring the dead back, then the fabled Book of Amun-Ra could kill them. She and Dr. B set forward to study the hieroglyph slabs on display in the museum to find the location of the Book of Amun-Ra. As they did, they heard a loud chanting coming from outside of the museum. The townspeople of Cairo had been placed under a spell by Imhotep that compelled them all to be his slaves while taking on boils and sores. The two scholars deciphered the markings as fast as they could, but the pounding at the door below in the main entrance alerted the resistors to Imhotep's presence, and Jonathan quickly left the museum to go outside and start the car. O'Connell tried to rush Evelyn and Dr. B along as they read the hieroglyphs, which they succeeded in doing exactly as the townspeople pounded through the doors, and O'Connell, along with Evelyn, Daniels, Dr. B, and Ardith, ran from the museum to Jonathan's car, escaping the mobs just as Benny screamed out to Imhotep that they were escaping. The gang drove out into the streets of Cairo till the roads were blocked with a mob of townspeople, which were all hit when Jonathan floored the gas pedal in his car when his foot was slammed down onto it by O'Connell. The car was soon after covered in townspeople, which were all thrown off, but managed to take down Daniels, who was brought before Imhotep and consumed as well as his fellows. The car eventually hit a fire hydrant, compelling its passengers to run from the townspeople as they cornered everyone. The townspeople then parted, making way for Imhotep, who appeared completely regenerated. Imhotep then spoke, his words translated by Benny, stating that Evelyn must go with him, and her friends would be spared if she did. Reluctantly, Evelyn stepped forward, with much displeasure from O'Connell, who drew out his gun at the mummy. Evelyn stopped him from firing, reminding Rick that Imhotep still needed to take Evelyn to Hamunaptra to perform the ritual. O'Connell lowered his gun as Imhotep, Evelyn, and Benny left, Imhotep ordering his slaves to kill the survivors. O'Connell then opened a manhole cover and had Jonathan and Ardith escape into it, though Dr. B opted to stay behind and hold off the townspeople with his sword, giving his own life to save the others, as O'Connell, Jonathan, and Ardith escaped into the sewers. They found more zombified townspeople and staved them off with a dynamite blast, devising a plan to rescue Evelyn. O'Connell had Jonathan and Ardith take him to the one individual that might be able to help, Winston Havelock. Winston Havelock of the Royal Air Force had set up his hangar in the dunes in Arfoud, awaiting nothing and sipping tea while native boys herded their goats around the runway. And Winston was thusly surprised at O'Connell when he explained what had happened. O'Connell went on to explain that the mission that Winston was asked to help with was the recovery of Evelyn, a task that might take his life, and Winston happily accepted the position, loading up the plane with the trouble of having to secure another spot on the plane for Jonathan and Ardith. Jonathan and Ardith, due to a lack of room, were tied to the wings of the plane and taken for a drive on the plane's wings. The plane then took off into the desert, with O'Connell in the gunner's seat, and as they flew towards Hamunaptra, Winston saw a large sandstorm. The sandstorm, however, was Imhotep himself, who had become the sands of the desert and taken Benny and Evelyn with him to the outskirts of Hamunaptra. Imhotep saw the plane flying towards the ruins of Hamunaptra and conjured up another sandstorm, with all the sand on the ground, amassing a massive wall of sand and wind that took his face and chased the plane, O'Connell began firing machine gun shots at the face as the plane flew. And soon after, the sandstorm had engulfed the entire plane in sand and wind, causing the engines to burn out. Evelyn, who stood next to Imhotep as he caused the storm, took action and kissed him, breaking his concentration and stopping the storm. The plane's engines, however, had overheated and the plane crashed down into the desert. O'Connell helped Ardith and Jonathan out of the plane before going on to help Winston, who he saw had been killed in the crash due to a broken neck. At that moment, the plane sank down into the quicksands of the desert, taking Winston's body with it. Taking a moment of silence to observe Winston's passing, O'Connell, Jonathan, and Ardith continued on towards Hamunaptra. Battling Imhotep, O'Connell and Ardith began to pry apart the rocks that blocked an entrance into the tunnels while Jonathan held up the torch. Jonathan was distracted by a wall mural that had several jewels embedded into it, prying one off and holding it. Jonathan examined it for a moment before it split open and revealed a scarab beetle that cut into its hand, almost reaching his head before O'Connell took a knife and cut the beetle out. As the three men continued to walk on through the corridors, O'Connell noticed a mirror-like object close to the ceiling in one chamber. With one shot, he turned it, illuminating the room with sunlight and revealing great amounts of golden treasure, which O'Connell restrained himself from taking. As they looked about the chamber, they heard a croaking sound, and with that a mummy revealed itself, cracking through the floor. As one corpse came from the floor, so did others, joined by more mummies that came from the corridors, shambling and groaning. The three men took out their guns and began to blast the mummies away, heading to the statue of Horus so as to find the golden book. Once they had reached the statue of Horus, O'Connell and Jonathan began to try and pry its compartment open as Ardith provided cover fire. O'Connell and Jonathan continued to pry the compartment when a trio of mummies burst through the floor once more, threw both men aside and began to pry open the compartment themselves. The compartment, however, was rigged with the same salt acid that had been inside the statue of Anubis, burning all three corpses away. Once the compartment was opened, the golden book was extracted. Ardith told O'Connell and Jonathan to save Evelyn and kill the mummy off, leading the mummies away as he ran through a corridor. Blasting as many as he could, O'Connell then lit a stick of dynamite and threw it into a dead end, blowing a hole through the wall and killing off more mummies. O'Connell and Jonathan then made our way through the hole. Imhotep, having chained Evelyn to a sacrificial altar, began to perform the incantations that would bring Ankh-Sunamun back, almost stabbing Evelyn fatally before Jonathan intervened. While Jonathan stood at the height of a staircase, brandishing the Book of Amun-Ra, O'Connell snuck into the chamber, took a golden sword from a nearby statue, and began to take down the mummy priests, cutting Evelyn's chains as he did. Most of the priests had fell, but one dismembered corpse grabbed him by the ankles, pulling him down, while another tried to get at his neck, and the disembodied mummy hand of one priest grabbed the sword. One final mummy took a large stone slab in its grip, about to crush O'Connell before O'Connell reached out towards the hand, taking the sword and hacking down the mummy's legs before it could harm him. Jonathan then mistakenly summoned up even more of the mummies, all sporting soldier garb and spears, compelling O'Connell to duel more of them. As a number of the mummies faced O'Connell, he screamed at them. The mummies roared back, and O'Connell ran from them before they could catch him. Through moats and corridors, scaling one wall by sliding up on a rope from a hanging cage, dueling them on. O'Connell managed to destroy more as he ran down the stairs of the sacrificial chamber, decapitating two and burning one up until they finally outnumbered and overpowered him. Before they could bring down their attacks, however, the mummies were stopped by Jonathan, who read the final incantations for the spell that summoned the mummies up, stopping them from harming O'Connell, removing their blades from his face. The mummies stood motionless until Jonathan gave them the order to kill Suleiman, which they carried out at once. In anger, Imhotep lunged forward to strangle Jonathan, but O'Connell leaped forward and chopped off the mummy's arm. The arm's rotted sinews revealing that below his human appearance, the mummy was still a dead man inside. In reciprocation, Imhotep seized O'Connell by the shirt and threw him, not caring that his robe had slipped off as his arm was chopped off. Jonathan then reached through his robes and took the puzzle box needed to open the Book of Amun-Ra, using it to open the book as Evelyn read through it, looking for the spell that would stop Imhotep. As the Carnahans looked through the text, Imhotep threw O'Connell about against statues and the floor, until he seized O'Connell up by his throat, strangling him, and prepared to deliver his final attack, unhinging his jaw. Evelyn, however, read aloud the incantations to stop Imhotep, summoning the god Anubis, who rode into the chamber on his chariot and drove through Imhotep, taking away his immortality. Anubis had not, however, killed Imhotep, and Imhotep moved forward furiously towards O'Connell, intending to kill him, but O'Connell was ready with his sword, stabbing the priest. As he stepped forward, Evelyn revealed that Imhotep was mortal, and the mummy stepped back, dying into a moat, dying while many souls engulfed him, reducing him to a mummy once more as he uttered his final words. Death is only the beginning. Lane, another corridor, Benny, Rick's former friend, was walking with a saddlebag full of stolen gold from the treasuries. The collapse of Hamunaptra by leaning the bag on a lever on the wall. O'Connell, Jonathan, and Evelyn, hearing the walls crumbling, took the opportunity to leave, though Jonathan had tripped on a staircase and dropped the Book of Amun-Ra in a moat. Evelyn chastised Jonathan for dropping the book before O'Connell and Jonathan hurried her along. As the three ran through the corridors and chambers, Jonathan stopped in the treasury, wondering why they couldn't take some of the treasures with them. Before O'Connell and Evelyn rushed him out as well, Benny, who had tried to catch up with O'Connell but could not make it through a collapsing doorway in time. O'Connell, despite Benny's previous betrayals, made an effort to help Benny out of the chamber, but could not pull him out in time as the doorways closed, sealing Benny in with a swarm of scarabs as his own torch burned out, leaving Benny to his doom. O'Connell, Evelyn, and Jonathan ran quickly from the ruins, reaching the surface as it crashed down in a massive series of dusty explosions. Once the trio had escaped, a hand reached out to Jonathan. Ardith had escaped the ruins alive, astride a camel, and informed them that they had earned the respect of the Magi for their defeat of Imhotep. Blessing them in Allah's name, Ardith rode off into the sunset, leaving them behind as Jonathan complained that they would once more go home empty-handed. But O'Connell knew that he, at least, was not empty-handed, as he had found Evelyn kissing her deeply. This sight displeasing Jonathan. The three survivors then mounted camels and rode off into the sunset, unaware that they had some treasures with them in a saddlebag, courtesy of Benny. Alright y'all, that's the end of my video.